We do have a quorum present, and we have Dr. Gershio, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Green, and Ms. Brown. We do have a statement from Mr. Williams that he cannot be with us this evening.
And Ms. McClellan likewise has informed us she will not be here this evening.
Okay, all right, and Ms. McClellan also. Thank you. Okay, so the meeting will proceed as is indicated in the agenda. And at this time, I would like to ask if everyone read the minutes, and if so, if we can have an approval of the minutes as distributed. Any corrections or additions to the minutes?
I make the motion.
Okay. It has been moved and properly seconded that the minutes will be accepted as distributed. And thank you so much. I just want to say that I reviewed the minutes, and the board covered quite a bit last month with the 2 reports, and you had a very lively discussion, which was really great to read about. I do know that a lot of work went into the joint evaluation that we did with the county, and it was an audit that really revealed quite a bit, and I think it's great that we were able to share that responsibility with the county. And of course, we had the TASER briefing report that you accepted as well. So I want to commend you for the discussion and accepting those 2 reports during last month's meeting. Okay, I don't have anything more from my report, so we can now move to the executive director's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, everyone. It's nice for us all to be back together again. It seems like it was a long time, but it was just a month. There has been some good feedback on the joint performance audit conducted with the city controller on the Bureau of Police, as was required under the 2020 referendum to the Home Rule Charter. So we've accomplished that, and it was very substantive, and the response to it has been positive, and the Bureau has been very receptive to the recommendations contained therein. Our intake for the year to date is 101 complaints. We have moved forward with kind of regrouping on what we intend to do with the staffing. You'll recall that we have an investigator position available. We had offered the position to a couple of candidates. Ultimately, they declined, and so we are decided to cancel the existing list and initiate a new list of qualified individuals for consideration for that position. Second, we have the approved community liaison position, and that is being, Ms. Hampton's been talking to Human Resources about that, so we can do that properly since it's a brand new position. It's not an existing position that's being, that we're just bringing somebody into. So it's a little bit different, but then we will have to advertise and create a civil service list for that position as well. Our intention is to fill both of those as soon as possible, probably the investigator sooner than the liaison. I mean, that's absolutely so, but by the end of the year to have both of those positions fully on board and working with full capacity. The annual report numbers are still being refined, and my intention is to have that to you for the July meeting and then publicly released if you adopt it. We are hosting the quarterly meeting for the Pennsylvania State Law Enforcement Citizen Advisory Commission on August the 5th. We do have permission and a reservation for council chambers. We have several tech requirements to accomplish that meeting, to facilitate it properly. and accessibly. So if council chambers is not able to adapt to that, then we'll be looking for another location, but we'll keep you informed of that. But as it stands right now, that meeting will be held in Pittsburgh on August the 5th at 10
Sorry.
a.m.
I'm sorry, Ms. Benjer, what meeting was that for again?
Pennsylvania State Law Enforcement Citizen Advisory Commission. It was established in July of 2020 by Governor Wolf, and it's the only one of its kind in the country. So it has unique standing. Its oversight encompasses all law enforcement agencies under the direction of the governor in the Commonwealth. There were a couple of articles recently related to police concerns. We're following up on some of them just so we can better articulate what the substance of those concerns are. For example, there was a report the other day about officers receiving disciplinary notice about their failure to be vaccinated against COVID. There's still outstanding the case of the alleged sex assault. There's, on the other side of the coin, some interest in whether or not secondary details were paid as they're supposed to be paid. And of course, the Mr. Rogers situation remains outstanding. Mr. Rogers, you'll recall, was tased in October by City of Pittsburgh police officers, and then he consequently died. That case remains in the hands of the district attorney, so far as I know. And I believe that will be the extent of my report to you tonight. If you have any questions or anything you'd like us to follow up on, please just tell me and we will do so.
I would like to correct my statement. I said the county, and it should have been the city who we joined in that evaluation.
Just, I don't know if this quick discussion, if need be, or just comment. The report about the city being paid for the secondary employment details or whatever. This had come up some time ago, and I think it actually, I don't know if that was tied to what happened with previous Chief Harper and some of the other stuff that unfolded with that. Was this forum ever involved in any of the review of how that stuff was handled and policy-wise? I know they made changes in how they were doling out the opportunities to officers, which I still hear is not necessarily what they said it was going to be. But just curious if we've had any role with that, and it seems like this might be sounds like a similar, a little bit different issue, but same concept of these secondary details always presenting issues.
Well, secondary details, also known as moonlighting, is a hot topic. There's no question about that. And pursuant to the situation that you referred to back about 10 years ago, when the chief of police was Nate Harper, and there was a grand expose about irregularities related to special events in the Bureau of Police and secondary details and that sort of thing. And it resulted, it was a bad time. It was scandalous, all that occurred. And as a result of that, they did change the way they managed secondary details, qualifications to participate in secondary details, as well as financial accountabilities applied to the finances that were associated to special events permits, and then, of course, the secondary details. At that time, they engaged with a company called Cover Your Assets. It was out of North or South Carolina, I'm not sure where, but it basically was a clearinghouse for secondary detail opportunities for police. It was a computerized program. The jobs were listed based on seniority. The officers had the opportunity to claim a job. And it worked pretty well from what I understand. There's always a way to get around some of these structural restrictions. But the timeliness of this now is that it appears that they've relinquished the use of an outside contractor to manage those details. And they have somewhat changed the requirements for the qualifications to participate in the details. That's part of why I wanted to come back to you in July, fully able to brief it, with some reliable information.
Okay.
When it was recognized there's so many issues that go into that whole notion of police officers working secondary details. Most importantly is the use of a public asset, which is their enforcement power. And it is not their personal asset, it's our asset, the community asset. And that being used to protect private interests. So it's always, every police department has problems or they have issues around it, and how they manage it differs based on jurisdiction, of course. But the city recognized that they were not collecting for overhead associated to secondary detail. For example, if an officer gets injured and they are engaged in a secondary detail, who do you think is paying and taking care of that officer? We are, not the business that hired the officer or purchased the service. So there's a whole lot that I personally would surely love to see change about all of that. Personal stuff aside, it also becomes a little bit of a perverse incentive for people who want to become police officers, because they say, oh, there's overtime and there's all that detail money. That's not why we want them to become police officers. And it shouldn't be a motivating factor for these folks, but it is. And from what I understand, and I read through a revised policy not all that long ago where they were changing. It was a couple of months ago, but it's contemporary in that it was being changed, and that they were internally going to be managing these details again. One of the big bugs in that system, the original system, was they basically had a job pimp. They had an officer could identify a potential opportunity for a detail, and then could engage the individual officer to cover that detail, and basically became the manager of details, that they could have their own little, pocket full of businesses that they would obtain officers to come and cover the detail. But then that officer would get a cut of the pay. And so that was pretty much eliminated in the revision of 10 years ago. But there are still some of those kinds of jobs out there where there's an individual who is managing the detail rather than it being a bureau managed detail, which was the intent 10 years ago, was to make it something that became available through the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police. The company or the business that wanted to engage secondary officers had to go through a clearance. They had to submit an application to be qualified to even engage officers in secondary details. And then they had the overhead. There was a certain amount of money to be collected on every hour of detail that was paid to the city. So it became a little bit better organized and a little tighter, but fundamentally it remains a problem. And that's not a slam on the officers doing details. It's got nothing to do with them, other than this being a policy matter that is accessing and making available public asset through our government for people to purchase. So there's something that's attractive about it, and it's inviting, and it's something that can be enhance an officer's income, certainly. But you can go to the next level of a real esoteric discussion about it and the ethics involved in it, where the accoutrements of their employment is actually enhancing them, but the accoutrements of their employment belong to the community, not to them. So it's thanks, Mr. Robinson, for opening that discussion. That's what I kind of would like to return in July with a cogent here, this is what we know about the details and where they stand today. I understand today in Public Source, there was an article related to secondary details. So I did not read it. And that's why I don't want to misstate something, but that's the background of.
I appreciate the background. That was helpful. Kind of concerning that they made it, again, I don't know the timeline yet. We'll wait till next month, but they made a change to the policy and then we're back in the news again because something seems to be amiss possibly. So.
Yes,
we'll
and the number of hours that officers are permitted to work in details was increased again, which becomes another concern. If you're working 40 hours a week, and then you're adding 30 hours of detail time, 70 hours a week. So you have a fatigued officer, and then you have a calamity. And then it becomes a question of, did they follow procedure or not? They could have just been plain old tired because they were working 70 hours a week, week after week after week after week. So the monitoring of that detail time is important as a supervisory check to the well-being of the officers. And so it just, I just will appreciate that opportunity to come back to fully explain it in July.
That's even more noteworthy, that comment you just made, considering there's been requests or comments about them being short-staffed. So you're short-staffed, but you got staff working for private entities. So
yes, and then even to be, a devil's advocate on that side of the coin, those businesses are paying taxes. So their protection should also be there because they're part of our community. And if you look at the mess in Southside, where the businesses did come together, again, within the last 10-year period, where they had the responsible hospitality project underway, where there were expectations placed upon the purveyors down there that you have to have inside security. Uniformed officers are not permitted to come in and police your activity at night. They'll be outside, but they're not coming in here and doing that. You have to have your own security inside. And for the most part, that started to take off. But then I don't know what happened, but that collapsed. And Southside now is worse than it was, before they attempted the hospitality project. So, it's a bigger issue than community policing or community caretaking. And again, how we manage the police part of it, the law enforcement part of it is something that you all can make some suggestions about next month after we'll put it on the agenda for discussion, and perhaps we get some public comment on it as well.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Pittinger?
Madam Chair, if I may, I was on vacation the last couple of weeks, but I should report back to you that while I was away, I did have a lengthy discussion with WISA, the public radio station, about the pending revocation of the Pennsylvania law enforcement accreditation for the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, because of our well-intended public policy codified for harm reduction in traffic stops. The requirements of our ordinance is it limits the ability of police officers, or it discourages police officers from enforcing, I think it's something like 8 sections of the motor vehicle code. And because they are sworn, they are required and obligated to fulfill their duty to enforce whatever violations they may observe. Our ordinance, suggests otherwise and discourages the stopping of vehicles for certain reasons. And we had that discussion last month extensively with Member Williams, who was explaining the distinction between the crimes code and the motor vehicle code and all of that. But as a result of that, the accreditation that the Bureau worked so diligently on and did attain in 2014, I believe it was, that it's in peril now, and that's terribly unfortunate. It's a message to the public that the Bureau is maintaining adherence to contemporary best practices and so on and so forth. And it was a reinforcement of the expectation that we saw come out of the consent decree. So the Chiefs of Police Association meets on July 26th. And at that time, the status of the Bureau's accreditation will be determined. But I had an extensive interview with WISA about that. I also had an interesting discussion and visit with a reporter from KDKA about an incident that happened in Brookline. And there was a video that accompanied that concern, that issue that we had talked about with this reporter. And our staff, we looked at it together yesterday. And we concluded that, in fact, there was no, it involved a pedestrian stop on Brookline Boulevard. The individual was held by a police officer until backup arrived. And ultimately, I believe there were 11 or 12 officers that converged on this scene for this one male. And while we looked at what, happened there didn't appear to be anything overtly inconsistent with the use of force policies, detention, anything of that nature. But what was intriguing, and this goes directly to Mr. Robinson's point, that we have 12 officers respond to this call, and yet we don't have enough officers to cover our shift work, right? So how are these officers being deployed? Perhaps there was an operation underway there that we had no knowledge of, and that is quite possible. But it was, I was taken aback when I saw the number of officers that responded to this one call. So that was part of the recommendation from the controller's audit, also to look at how are officers deployed and how are we making assignments, and what's the criteria, and is it data driven, or is it just contingent on how many officers are available for whatever shift it is that's being filled, and to what extent does that contribute to overtime costs? So I think that was it, those two items. There was a third item, but I don't recall what it was right now. Certainly wasn't of high priority. Okay, that's all. Thank you,
That's
Madam Chair.
all. Thank you very much for keeping us up to date on all those issues. Is there any unfinished business? Okay. Is there any new business?
I just have a question.
Go ahead.
Is it appropriate to ask?
Yes, go ahead.
Being the maybe one of the newest members on the board, what does it look like when there is a exiting chief of police and an entering chief of police? How does that look for the board? Is that a different type of meeting? Like, how does that look? What is the procedure in that, as far as cases and things like that?
Madam Chair, shall I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, we will wait with bated breath to see who comes in to take the helm. Ordinarily, and we've experienced, I believe, 5 chiefs since this board has been operating. It has very little impact. Again, our focus is on the policies and procedures, and what we saw with the transition in chiefs was very little change in those practices in the Bureau, their management. Style becomes something that is of interest to observe, but it doesn't much affect our work at all. We have not been involved in the selection of the chief of police. It would probably not be terribly appropriate for us to be involved in that, because at that point, if you were judging the actions or the decisions of that leader, you might perhaps be in conflict. So it's cleaner probably not to be, but we haven't been, so we've never really had to wrestle with that. Very, very little impact to us.
Thank you.
You're
Just
welcome.
to follow up on that. Thank you, Ms. Brown. I was going to ask a similar question, but I guess mine's a little bit tailored different towards once the new chief is brought on, is there a time and point when, I don't know if it's you, Ms. Pittenger, who meets with the chief to kind of go over now whether if internal candidate or external might make a difference too, but just to let them know the role of the board.
Absolutely. And we extend an invitation to that chief to come to the meeting and closest to the appointment time to your meeting following that, to have a discussion with that chief.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, and there is no new business, so we will move on to the case reviews. And they were sent in the package today. So we will look at the reviews and the recommendations that have been given to us by the investigators. So we have no public hearing scheduled. We do have 2 full investigations. Case number 07222 and case number 06322. May I have a motion to accept the recommendation that these 2 be moved to full investigation?
So moved.
It has been moved. Second.
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded that we move these 2 to full investigation. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, I see the hand. The ayes have it, the motion carries. We have 4 that we're authorizing for a 30-day full extension for full investigation. They are case 04922, 04122, 03922, and 01822. May I please have a motion for a 30-day extension for a full investigation of these 4 cases?
So moved.
Dr. Gershio moved, and may I have a second?
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, the motion carries. There are no unsustainable, there are no unfounded, no other, and we have 1 suspension until July of 2022. And that is case 03522. May I have a motion for suspension until July for that case? Dr. Gershio moved. May I have a second?
Second.
It has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it, the motion carries. And as usual, we have the continued suspensions included in the packet. And there are 14 that we are continuing suspension, but this list gives us an update of where the cases are. Okay, any questions about the case reviews or the continued listing of cases?
Madam Chair, some of
Yes.
what we've discussed, and you may see differently as we move along for case reviews, that there are situations, and in fact, you have one in your packet that was just moved to a full investigation plus 30 days that are solely related to a policy matter. And I think you may find that we'll be making recommendations to you to make a recommendation related to policy and ask you to make some consideration about what you would like to see in the policy. Where ordinarily we end up, because our rules are such as they are, you have a limitation, and I talked to Mr. Ward about this, but we have a limitation on when you can make a finding and a recommendation. And you can't do that unless there's been a public hearing, which means you have to have some adversarial situation where there is a suspicion and there's cause to believe that misconduct occurred. And you conduct a hearing to evaluate testimony and evidence. The bigger issue, and probably the more significant way for you to influence, is through the policies. Now, I review policies regularly as they're in a draft form. I have that opportunity, and we have a very good relationship with that unit in the Bureau of Police. And I can say on their behalf that they know what they're doing over there. When they're writing their policies and their procedures, these are individuals, they're all sworn officers, but they're very well-versed in best practices. They don't hesitate to use data assessments for looking back at policies and maybe something should be changed or standards or whatever it may be. But we have a good rapport, a working rapport with that unit. And though there are times where some of these matters come up, you get them in a fact example of a case, and you see how it plays out. And so when those things occur and an investigator identifies, well, perhaps this is not actually a performance issue, but it's a policy issue, and here's where the deficiency in that policy rests. And they tell you that so that you can decide whether it's something you want to send to a public hearing, or you can tell us to send them a letter. And we've done that on occasion before, but you can tell us to send a letter making that recommendation, whereas it's not coming from the board as a finding and a recommendation pursuant to it, because the recommendation is policy. It is not disciplinary or performance related. So next month, you'll probably see a couple of suggestions along those lines, and you'll recognize it when you see it. But that's why, because there are things here that may be unfounded in terms of the subject officer's conduct, because there's no policy that addresses what the officer did or didn't do. And yet, if that loophole or if that deficiency was fixed, then there would be a measurement of whether what the officer did was consistent or inconsistent with the policy. So that you can't find that they were wrong, but we can certainly make the suggestion that the policy be changed.
Okay.
And it's different from a finding related to a complaint in which the subject officer is the accused.
Okay, well, it's good to know that we can give them feedback that they can seriously consider to fix, a gap, a loophole that may exist between what the policy says and the actual behavior of a policeman, a police officer. Okay. All right, any other comments about anything at all?
Just to the description you just shared, Ms. Pittenger, about the public hearing, are you saying that in a matter like that, where there's no allegation against the officer that we're pursuing, so there's been no need for a public meeting or public hearing, but we have a concern about a policy? How would you said we can just make that recommendation, or have you guys make that recommendation to you all to go to that unit?
Two things. One, what you receive on a regular basis are based on cases, on facts, sets of facts. In the rules, you have also the power to conduct a public hearing on any matter of concern to you, including policies and procedures. But when we offer you a case summary and we say, well, the officer didn't do anything, and they didn't do anything because the policy doesn't prohibit whatever the officer did, then that can be something that needs to be tweaked in the policy. And while it may go away as unfounded against the officer, there's still something there. But you're not going to conduct a whole public hearing to come out so that you can make a finding that the officer didn't do anything wrong, but the policy is deficient. This would give you the opportunity on a case-by-case basis to say, we think that this policy would be better stated, or this should be revised somehow. And that I can take that and we can send that to the unit writing the policies as a recommendation from you, without
Okay.
going through the formality of a hearing.
Gotcha. That's what I
And you-
thought you said.
Yeah, and you wouldn't necessarily take a policy concern out of a particular complaint that you've reviewed and say, well, we're going to hold a policy public hearing on this. Because it may not be widespread. It may not be that broad. If you see a pattern and it looks like the same policy is the one that is common to all of them, then I would say surely you would want to have a policy hearing on that. But these incidentals, as they come along, they can make a difference. And just, we're going to try to emphasize that in the summaries that you receive starting in July.
Thank you.
So will that be in a column, or how will we know when it's a policy versus
will be.
behavior?
It will be in the recommendations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your form won't change so much as
Uh-huh.
you may notice some more detailed substantive
Okay.
information or discussion. Like in the
Okay.
past where I might have said, this policy number, blah, 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 says this, but this is what we saw. That kind of thing, but with more substance and maybe more suggestion of conclusion related to the policy itself, as
Mhm.
opposed to the officer's conduct.
All right. Okay. Any other discussion? If not, the next meeting of the board is July 26th at 6 p.m. again, and that will be via Zoom as well. All right. Ms. Stephanie, do we have any public comments?
Just Triss is in there and she doesn't have a microphone, so I don't see her typing.
Okay.
She's the only one in attendance.
Okay, is she? Okay, all right. All right, I think we've covered everything on the agenda for tonight. Okay, hi Trish. And that will conclude the meeting. I want to thank everyone for attending, and Ms. Ward, thank you for being with us each month. We appreciate that. I will accept a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Second?
Got it. Second.
Okay, it has been moved and properly seconded. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? The ayes have it. Everyone, be safe, have an enjoyable 4th of